Hare Krishna. Welcome to another evening in the lives of the Vaishnavacharyas. My name is Chatra Atmadas. I see the chat room's already full and jamming. Hare Krishna Prabhu, it's nice to see you all out there. See a few new names, new locations. Have a devotee joining us from Holland tonight. Usual crowd from Virginia and Holy Grass is there, Mauricio and Kevon. Nice to see you all, or hear you all, or however we're doing this. It is a little one-sided at this point. One day soon it'll be interactive. We'll be able to go back and forth with questions and answers. I get to see what all of you look like. All right, so tonight we're venturing into territory that many devotees will not be familiar with. As Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu established his Sankirtan movement and then began his preaching activities, all of his immediate associates were the topics and descriptions of writings such as the Chaitanya Charitamrita, books such as the Chaitanya Mangala, things of this nature. In that manner, we understand and hear about the first wave, first generation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates. Following this, of course, is the second wave of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates. These are personalities that we've discussed many times: Narottam, Srinivas, Shyamananda, people of this nature. Some of the sons of Shivananda Sen, Kavi Karnapur, like that. We're going to take it one step further tonight, and we're going to speak about a devotee by the name of Rasikananda. Rasikananda is a name that may be unfamiliar to some of us, many of us. It was until a few years ago to myself. Rasikananda is the foremost and prominent disciple of Shyamananda. Shyamananda, of course, being the Shiksha disciple of Jiva Goswami and the Diksha disciple of Hridoy Chaitanya, who is, of course, the Diksha disciple of Gauridas Pandit. So you see the line that he comes in is a very exemplary line. All lines are, but this particular connection here. So we're going to speak tonight about the pastimes of Rasikananda and try and understand a little bit about his activities. As I was waiting for all the tech stuff to get organized and all, I was thumbing through some pictures I have, and in one of the books that I was looking at on Rasikananda's life, and there's a picture there of his samadhi and some of his personal paraphernalia. And part of that personal paraphernalia consisted not only of his shoes and of his japamala, but of the flutes that he played during kirtan. And I thought of my own friend Kish here in Alachua. He's quite a flute player in the different kirtan programs and all. So, all of these activities we perform in devotional service, they do have a history, and they can be traced back to the associates of Mahaprabhu. Rasikananda, the information we find about Rasikananda is predominantly available in 3 books. The Bhakti Ratnakar, which we've discussed many times. The Prem Vilas, which is written by Nityananda Das, the disciple of Janavamata. And then the most available source, a book called the Rasik Mangala. And this is written by Gopijana Ballabha. Gopijana Ballabha was he was the immediate disciple of Rasikananda, and he was the he was the son of Rasamaya. Rasamaya was a godbrother of Rasikananda and a very prominent disciple here again of Shyamananda. His son, Gopijana Ballabha, became the disciple of Rasikananda and wrote this book, Rasika Mangala, which describes the activities of both Rasikananda and some, of course, overlapping activities of Shyamananda, the guru of Rasikananda. Because how can one speak about the disciple without speaking about the guru? Whenever we describe the activities of Srila Prabhupada, one is, by circumstance, obligated to speak about the activities of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So in the same way, Now, I'd like to start out with a couple of very, very nice prayers from this Rasik Mangala. These are offered by Gopijana Ballabha to his guru, Rasikananda. I bow down to Rasikananda, who is like the sun. He is the giver of deep joy, a possessor of the conjugal mellow of love of God and a mine of deep feelings for Lord Krishna. He can bring peace to all persons' minds and remove the darkness of ignorance. He is the well-wisher of the devotees and the one who extinguishes all material miseries. He holds the source of all joy and is the father of the wealth of mercy and the deliverer of the poor. I worship the feet of Rasikananda, who is ever joyful. He is the abode of well-being and is filled with the mellow of conjugal love. Let all mankind serve Rasikananda, whose face is like the moon and whose words are like nectar. The goddess Saraswati resides in his throat, and his bodily effulgence resembles that of Lakshmi. His teeth are like kunda flowers or pearls, and his smile is ever dazzling. His eyes are like bees, and his arms resemble the stalk of a lotus flower. So this is how Gopijana Ballabha starts off his book in glorification of and praise to. He then continues, and he says, I worship Thakurani Shamdasi, the wife of Rasik, and an embodiment of love and affection. She was a disciple of Shamananda, a devoted wife and a mother to all. She worshipped Govinda throughout her entire life. I worship Sri Devaki, the daughter of Rasika. She was a disciple of Shamananda and the eldest daughter of Rasika. I worship Radhananda Thakur, the son of Rasika and a favorite disciple of Shamananda. He was always absorbed in Krishna consciousness, and tears constantly fell from his eyes. He was fully conversant with the scriptures and was an expert musician. I worship Krishnananda Das, who did not know anything but Shamananda. This is another one of the sons. I worship the daughter of Rasika, Vrindavati, who was famous for her politeness and perseverance. I worship the pure-hearted Krishnagati, the middle son of Rasikananda. He was so intoxicated with love of Krishna that he could not differentiate between day and night. Krishna was not only his life, but his resort. I worship the youngest son of Rasika, Radhakrishna Das, who was a favorite of Shamananda and who was pure in heart. He was full of love and kind to all beings. So we see here that not only, of course, was Rasikananda a highly advanced devotee, his wife Shamdasi was a disciple of Shamananda in his footsteps and also a very highly advanced devotee. And similarly, his children became disciples in this way. So in this way, we see that the entire family of Rasikananda took to the process of devotional service under the instruction of Shamananda. Now, this is of course a very important point, because sometimes persons make mistakes assuming that a guru can only be in the sannyasa ashram. If we look throughout all of the literatures of the Gaudiya line, whether they be the immediate writings of Srila Prabhupada, or whether we date back to the Chaitanya Charitamrita and everything in between, there is no indication that only a sannyasi can give initiation. Quite the opposite, because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed that everyone should become guru. Therefore, we can assume that all classes of men, all ashrams, would have the responsibility of initiating disciples. So this is the instruction that we find there, and this is how we can appreciate the position of Rasikananda and his entire family. And then closing here, Gopijana Ballabha gives the following assessment. The glories of a devotee are like a vast, bottomless ocean, beyond the reach of even Brahma, Shiva, or Indra. Indeed, the glories of a devotee are greater than those of Krishna himself. Thus, we should always desire to take the dust from the feet of devotees. Rasika Murari was one such exalted devotee of Krishna. His magnificent qualities cannot be described even in thousands of years. I am merely a poor, incapable, and worthless fellow. Therefore, whatever I say is only by the grace of Rasika, the Lord of my life. How is it possible to describe his pastimes, which are like a bottomless ocean? Still, because of the request of the Vaishnavas, I shall attempt to describe the glories of Rasikananda Dev. Listening to the qualities of Krishna can surely help us to cross over this material world. However, listening to the glorious qualities of a pure devotee can help one cross the three phases of time. If one hears the Rasika Mangala once, millions of sins can be immediately destroyed. Indeed, all bonds can be removed and one can attain love and devotion for Krishna. Listening to the Rasika Mangala will remove all sorrow and misery. It will bring wealth to the poor and a son to the childless. Wherever people are suffering from the pinches of time, the hearing and chanting of the Rasika Mangala will remove them from all bonds of suffering. If anyone, young, old, man or woman, hears Rasik Mangala just once, all their desires for devotional service will be fulfilled. So this is a very, very nice mood that Gopijana Ballabha invokes before he begins to glorify Vaishnava. He plainly states that the real purpose of life is to take shelter at the feet of the Vaishnavas, to take the dust from their feet, to submit ourselves to their service. And then he continues on to say that if one simply listens to the glories of Krishna, then he will get out of the material world. But if one listens to the glories of Krishna's pure devotee, then he will get all freedoms and will be transported directly to the spiritual world. So this is the importance of understanding this process of Guru Diksha, that we need to have the shelter of a spiritual master, and that shelter of that spiritual master will deliver us. So, we've spoken enough about the preliminaries. We've eaten up 15 minutes of our precious time, but how have we used that precious time? We've used that precious time speaking about a precious topic. And this should be how we use our time, always engaged in hearing and chanting about the devotees. So, we'll start here. We want to describe the city of Rohini. Rohini is a city in the district of Mahabali. And this is an area of Utkala. Utkala is another name for the district of Orissa, for the state of Orissa in India. And Orissa is, of course, the home of Jagannath. The devotees from Orissa are very famous for their mood of devotion. There's an interesting thing about the city of Rohini. It mentions the beauty of Rohini could hardly be understood. It could be described only if one had millions of miles and thousands of years. Such a beautiful place. And the ornaments of this city, one of the most prominent ornaments was the hundreds of Brahmins that were regularly engaged in hearing and chanting about the Vedas and the Puranas and describing these scriptures. It mentions there was no poverty in the city of Rohini, that there was very little suffering, and that all the homes were ornamented with tulsi. But there was no devotion to Krishna to be found in the city of Rohini. Now, how do we understand this? Such glorious activities. The Vedas were all being sung, but the Vedas themselves do not give Krishna Bhakti. The Vedas can give one so many understandings of Karnakanda activities and worship of demigods and the different types of activities and samskars and so on and so on and so on. And the mere presence of the Brahmins does not necessarily mean that there was the worship of Krishna. There's so many types of Brahmins. Even we see the Tulsi plant was there. How do we understand this? Tulsi grows everywhere. You know, I mean, if you make some effort, you can find that Tulsi is growing everywhere through India, and not all places are filled with Krishna Bhakti. So somehow or another, this Krishna Bhakti was missing. So the king of this district was a very, very pious king. His name was Achyuta. And Achyuta's wife was Bhavani. Achyuta and his wife Bhavani had the desire for a child, and in due course of time she conceived and was pregnant. She bore this child for 10 months. We have a few of the ladies in our community here in Alachua that are currently bearing children. And if you tell them, okay, an extra month, they will probably give you a big curse. What was it? Mahaprabhu was 13 months in the womb, I believe it was. Sukadev Goswami was 16 years in the womb. So at any rate, for 10 months she carried this child. And in the beginning of the month of Kartik, she gave birth to this child. Actually, it mentions that during the first week or so of the month of Kartik, she began to show delivery pains. So immediately King Achyuta called for all the proper Brahmins to come, and those Brahmins began to recite all the mantras, and then they made everything auspicious, and then into this auspicious sound of the names of Hari being recited, Rasik took his birth. Now, of course, in the Vedic time, the name isn't known of the child immediately when he takes his birth. But describes the child's face was very moon-like. There's a very nice description I want to read from Gopijana Ballabha's Rasikananda. He mentions here, the child was not at all ordinary. The effulgence of his body illuminated the entire house. His moon-like face was decorated with a broad forehead. His nose was firm, and his eyes were like the leaves of a lotus petal. With finely shaped ears and a head full of black curly hair, his beauty was captivating. His lips were like the red bimba fruit, his shoulders like those of an elephant, and his hands like the stalk of a lotus. The child's fingers were decorated with nails that resembled the kunda flower, and his broad chest charmed the three worlds. His navel was very beautiful, and the threefold curve of his waist was like that of a lion. His knees and waist were beautifully shaped like a banana tree. The marks on his lotus feet were charming. His nails shone beautifully, and his complexion was a bright bluish black. So this is a nice description of Rasikananda. Now, I'm probably going to get tons of hate mail for this. Generally speaking, we see in this world when a child is born, they're not the most beautiful thing. Now, all the mothers and the parents, they will all comment, oh, what a beautiful kid. But as an impartial observer who has children and grandchildren of my own, I can honestly attest to the fact that most children, when they come out of the womb, they look like little wrinkled up prunes. You know, little wrinkled up old people, you know, because that's what they were not too many births ago, not too many moments ago. At any rate, the fact of the matter is that those of us that are forced to take our birth in this world come out of the womb looking less than dynamic. But we see here a very gifted and advanced devotee such as Rasikananda. The description of his bodily features is very pleasing to see. So this is one of the understandings of how Rasikananda made his appearance. Now, his mother, of course, was surrounded. Excuse me, those of you that aren't in the chat room, I'm looking at one comment made by one of our visitors to the chat room here. He says, yes, sometimes the children look like little Yodas. So I guess you have to know Star Wars to appreciate that. All right. So, at any rate, Mother Bhavani, of course, was always very, very happy to have the ladies around telling different stories and all. And so it mentions here that the neighbors came to Bhavani after the birth of her son, and they offered the following benedictions. Oh, my dear Bhavani, you are the most fortunate of women. You have gained this child as a result of your austerities. He will enlighten your entire family and bring joy to everyone. May Krishna always protect him. Now, this is a very interesting thing because from the beginning, from the get-go, if you will, now we hear the ladies offer this prayer, let Krishna protect this child. So what happens is that the child hears the name Krishna, and immediately he begins to cry in separation of Krishna. This is a little baby. He's just born. Now the babies are always crying. So, oh, he was just crying. He said, no, it mentions here that when he heard the name of Krishna, then he began to cry. And so, of course, the ladies, they all tried to calm him down. And it's a common thing that when the child's going to cry, that they put to chant Hare Krishna and sing some Krishna mantra like that. You know, this is what devotees do. And the child would cry more and more and more. So in due course of time, they were able to quieten the child. And mother gave some breast milk and fed the child, and he quietened down. And then the ladies all gave the following benediction. Let Mahesh and Parvati grant this boy 80 years of life. Another one said, let the goddess Shasti give this boy a long life. And another one said, may Lord Krishna always protect this boy. And what happened? May Lord Krishna. And again, he heard the name of Krishna and started crying again and again like this. So in this way, from the very beginning of his life, he was always very, very happy to hear the name of Krishna and very ecstatic in this way. So in due course of time, as is the custom of the samskars, it was the opportunity for giving the name-giving ceremony, for holding the name-giving ceremony. So the morning of the name-giving ceremony, Bhavani bathed and dressed herself in very nice clothing, very beautiful cloth, and called all the senior people present and gave gifts to all of them, and then had the child on her lap. And Achyuta, King Achyuta, Raja Achyuta came in and sat down after having awarded all kinds of gold and sesame seeds and rice and cows to all the Brahmins. So he sat down and they called the astrologer forward. The astrologer came in, and when the astrologer arrived, he pulled all the charts and looked at everything and calculated everything. And when he did, he said, according to all this, I can understand the name of the child. Now, there are three ways that a child is named. One way is that you look at the constellation the child is born under, and that constellation starts with a particular vowel, particular two letters, and then you form the child's name from that. Another way is that you look at the constellations as they correspond to the personalities of Krishna's pastimes. And then you understand, okay, after Matsya or Vamana or like that. Third way is that you give common name that the family wants to give. And actually there's a fourth way, you do a combination of all the above. So in the case of Rasikananda, King Achyuta engaged the astrologer. He read all the charts, did the different thing. He said, according to all the signs here, this child shall be known as Rasika. And everyone, Jai, Jai, Rasika, Jai, Rasika. So King Achyuta said, I have one request, please. It is my heartfelt desire to give my child the name Murari and address him by that. So please may he be known as Rasika Murari. Now this shows two interesting things. One is because after all he's the king, he can do anything he wants to. He can name him any name he wants to give him. But he seeks the permission and the blessing of the Brahmins. And he says to them, with your permission, I would like to call him Rasik Murari. So here again, Jai, Jai, Rasik Murari. Everybody's very happy. Big festivities, sweetmeats are given out to all the Brahmins that are there, and gold and coins, and big festival is a wonderful, wonderful time. So this goes on like this. So in due course of time, the child grows, and he begins to crawl around. And it mentions that the child was fearless in his crawling. He would crawl through thorns and rocks, and he would get dust all over himself, and constantly he had these little ankle bells on that ladies always put on their children, and the mother would always hear the ankle bells going this way and that way, and he would come across pots of containers, clay pots, and he would break them, and there would be milk and yogurt and ghee everywhere, and he'd be rolling in it and playing in it, just having a grand old time as a child. And so in this way the mother would always go and get him and clean him off and put him back down, and then like that, and then he would continue the same business again. Excuse me. And the ladies would constantly be engaged in calling on the child and chanting the names of Krishna around the child, and the child would start crying again very much, and then they would try and soothe him, and mother would take him in her arms and rock him and then try to give him breast milk, and they would be chanting, and he'd hear the name of Krishna and crying again, and so on and on like this. This was his entire youth was like this, his child's. So the time came for his grain ceremony. And when the grain ceremony was to take place, it mentions that, of course, here again, Rajachyuta invited all the Brahmins and all the neighbors and friends and gave them all wonderful gifts: sesame, rice, gold, cows in charity to the Brahmins, all types of presents and sweetmeats were distributed to all the friends and all like this. So in this way, the first grains were given. Now, after the first grain ceremony is done, what happens is that it's a tradition to lay out certain items that the child will crawl and take, and this will give some indication. Usually the items are the Bhagavatam and coins to see if the child will be inclined towards wealth or towards scholarship, Bhagavatam particularly. Other additions, one might put dirt to see if the child is inclined towards agriculture. One may put a pen and paper to see if he's a writer, things of this nature, different items. So in this case, all these items were laid out in front of Rasik. And Rasik says that they set him down after his grains, and he immediately looked and reached over and took the Bhagavatam and embraced it to his chest, wrapped both arms around it, and then began to cry profusely. So this was considered a wonderful, wonderful thing. The mother and the father had never seen anything like this, and everyone was so amazed. So when they saw that the child had not only gone for the Bhagavatam but had embraced it, they began to offer things like, "Oh, this boy, he's not an ordinary person. He must be a favored devotee of Lord Krishna." And someone else said, "Oh, this child will certainly rescue all living beings." And then another one said, "By his attachment to the Bhagavatam, he must be the creeper of all religion." And another one said, "Oh, Achyuta, he is the most fortunate of fathers to have a child such as this." So in this way, everyone was appreciating the grain ceremony of Rasik. Rasik Murari was very, very wonderful in this way. And, excuse me, throughout his entire youth, he was always very attached to the Bhagavatam. Now, it mentions as he grew and was a young boy, what would happen was, of course, like many of the other great acharyas you've heard about, all of his childhood activities were the pastimes of Krishna. He would organize all the boys together, and sometimes he would take clay and he would write the names of Krishna on their chests, on their arms, like that, And then he would organize different play. Okay, now you be Trinavarta, and you be a cowherd boy, and you be Mother Jasoda. And then he would organize that, and then he would do the Aghasura pastime. Okay, now you all be cowherd boys, you be the Aghasura snake here. And then he would arrange for all these different pastimes of Krishna. Attacking by Ristasura, okay, you be little gopi girls, and then another time he'd arrange for this one to, you be elder gopi ladies, and we'll come and steal the butter and yogurt, and all of these different pastimes of Krishna. And this is how he engaged his boyfriends, all of his childhood playmates, they would engage in this type of activity. And what would happen is that so much so was he absorbed in playing these pastimes of Krishna, all the pastimes of Krishna, with his friends, that he would give up eating and sleeping. He wouldn't come in properly to eat his meals. So finally, of course, mother and father would get him into the house to eat his meals. And then when he would be eating, then the father, he would say, "Okay, now I'm going back out." And Rajachyuta would say, "No, please, you don't go back out. If you go back out and play, you don't take proper care to eat and sleep. How will you maintain yourself? Please, you just stay inside today." So Rasik Murari said, "All right, I will stay inside on one condition, and that is that you arrange for the Srimad Bhagavatam to be read to me." So this was very agreeable to Rajachyuta. So what he did was he employed some Brahmins, and he engaged them to come every day, and after breakfast they would sit and read Srimad Bhagavatam, all of the pastimes of Krishna, to Rasik Murari. And in this way he was constantly hearing of the pastimes of Krishna. And in this way he was very, very satisfied. It mentions that when he would go out, that while playing with his playmates, if he came across a tulsi plant that was not properly cared for, he would immediately clean that area. He would immediately see that all the debris was moved around and tulsi was properly cleansed and worshipped and everything like that. And he was a very, very devoted worshiper of the cows. He would personally give grass to the cows from his own hands, and he would bathe the cows, wash them down, and he would provide different types of foods to them like this, always serving them. And this way, this was a great source of pleasure to him, to take care of Tulsi, take care of the cows, organize his boyfriends and his playmates and going around and doing Sankirtan like this. So, very, very wonderful in this way. Now, the next samskar to come up is the ear piercing. Sometimes we see within ISKCON that people are a little confused about getting the ears pierced, but this is one of the original sanskaras that are given by the Goswamis. So, at any rate, the time for the ear piercing of Rasik Murari came, and they invited everyone. Sweetmeats were handed out to all the visiting personalities. There was one lady that particularly came. Her name was Dayala Takarini. Dayala Takarini was an old Brahmin lady that was a follower of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. She had been in Puri during Mahaprabhu's pastimes and had seen some of the pastimes of the Lord and was very devoted. Now, she was an old friend of Bhavani, and while Bhavani was pregnant with Rasik, she would come and speak the pastimes of the Lord for the benefit of the mother and child. Those of you that are familiar, you know that when the lady is carrying the womb and the child hears everything, so it's a very common practice to read Shastra to the child. So in this way, she would come and tell the stories of the pastimes of the Lord for the benefit of both mother and child. So Dayala Takarani was invited. Now, at this point, she's a very elderly lady. Now, she has not seen Rasik Murari yet. So she comes to take darshan, and when she arrives there at the scene where the ear-piercing ceremony is to go on, she immediately faints. Of course, all the elderly ladies, all the village ladies, and all, they say, oh, the poor woman, she's just walked in the midday sun and come from a distance, and she's fainted due to the heat. Here, sprinkle some water and fan her a little bit like that. So she comes back to external consciousness, and she hears them speaking this way. She says, none of you know anything. I'd like to read you what she actually says here. When Dayala Takarini recovered, she told the ladies, you do not know the glories of this child. I fainted because I saw the form of Gopal within this child. He is not a mere child at all, but he is the life of this entire world. He will rescue all beings and preach love and devotion throughout the state of Utkala. He will preserve religious principles and serve the Tulsi tree, the banyan trees, the Brahmins, and all Vaishnavas. He will be kind to the needy and to the poor. By his bodily features, I can see he is a confidential devotee of Lord Krishna. Take care never to neglect his words or dishonor him. He will preach the 64 kinds of devotional service. He has appeared in this world to rescue all beings. I have no power to sing the countless glories of this child.